Okay, hello. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm here with my good friend Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and friends. How are you, Dee, tonight?
I'm happy to be here tonight. You've
Uh,
got a good show coverage, a lot of issues you're going to be talking about.
yeah, I'm very glad that you're here tonight as well, Dee.
Steve Wolfbrand is here. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Steve. How are you? And I think we have a few others here also, but they're not in a commenting mode. I think the way we'll begin tonight is I will share on Facebook and Twitter. Okay, you can share on Twitter.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll put up the first article for you. Okay, tonight
Oh,
we'll do the first article. Hi, Evelina. Glad to see you here tonight.
yeah, my Facebook account is obviously people know my Facebook account is not working.
For now,
The
it's in a review mode,
yes,
and we hope for the best.
yes.
Okay, but for now, that doesn't affect the Twitter situation or the YouTube situation.
No, it doesn't.
And so we'll still be working with that. And Steve says, hello, everybody from YouTube. Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, so let's begin with the sharing.
Yes, it's so important to share. Let everybody know that Joe is live right now.
Yes, that Joe is live. Okay, and that Dee is co hosting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Okay.
okay,
Okay, here we are.
I'm sharing on Facebook. And what did I do with my Twitter here?
Okay.
Hmm. 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 Okay, I know what I gotta do. Okay, that's that. Uh, so I will put up our first piece,
Sounds good.
which is from the UNS review. Dee is going to start off the program with this one for a change. Okay, Dee?
Okay.
I'm going to take.
This is, let me, here we go. Rare earth and reindustrialization. You've been May 14th, 2025.
And there's a picture of some rare earths, I gather.
Yes.
I gather those are not favorite dishes in a restaurant, but rather rare earths.
The New York Times is not usually mentioned in the same breath with Mining Journal or Northern Miner, the leading lights for the mining industry. But between April 14th and 17th, New York Times ran five with titles. China false critical minerals as trade war intensified. April 14th. What are rare earth metals? The export halted to China. That was on April 15th. How China took over the world's rare earth industry. April 16th. The mine is America's. The minerals are April 15th. Here is to know about rare earth minerals and renewable energy.
So D, you're having some problems with your sound.
Yes, I'm trying to fix my sound right now. I hear this echo. I don't know why this echo is coming up. Okay. In April, New York Times also published these titles. Elon Musk warns rare earth magnet shortage may delay Tesla's robots. U.S. announces deal to share Ukraine's mineral wealth. Not just rare earth, U.S. gets many critical minerals from China. China's halt of critical minerals pose risk for U.S. military programs. Readers may be forgiven for thinking New York Times is entering the arena normally. Oops.
Sorry.
Let me see. Da, 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 da. Rare earth. Okay, here we go. Our readers may be forgiven for thinking New York Times is entering the arena normally reserved for mining.com. Tellingly, since April 2nd, quote, Liberation Day, the New York Times has run more articles on rare earth metals than China's potential dumping of U.S. treasuries. Ooh,
How interesting.
yeah. Credit to New York Times, it hasn't focused, quote, two toys instead of 30, kind of frivolous theatrics from the tariff war. The true trump card China played is the rare earth ban to the U.S. In short, U.S. buyers will not be able to get rare earth minerals from China, even if they are willing to pay the 145% or whatever the number is on any given day reciprocal tariff. China is going after the jugular with this move. The New York Times realizes rare earth minerals central importance to U.S. tech, manufacturing, and military production. We'll dive into this later. Clearly, not that China has cut off U.S. access to rare earth. Building this industry is far more important to the U.S. economic and national security than assembling iPhones in the U.S., a fact that naturally escapes genius, financial genius like Miriam Navarro, Besant, and Lutnick.
Yes, the wonderful financial geniuses
Yeah.
of the Trump administration. Uh, well, it's really, I think, a scandal that before launching the tariff war, Trump and his advisors evidently didn't think about the possibility of China retaliating by cutting off our access to rare earths.
Mm.
Furthermore, it's kind of a scandal that they didn't think to build a rare earth industry here before even venturing to do any tariff nonsense with them.
Mm.
Furthermore, they didn't even think that if we're going to screw around with China and
Hold
jeopardize
it.
jeopardize our access to rare earths, uh, that maybe we shouldn't have screwed around with Canada because they're another one of our sources for rare earths, and it's not very smart to screw around with them at the same time we're screwing around with the Chinese. Just saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, please continue.
In fact, this should be a top priority and test bed for reindustrializing the US if the Trump regime is serious. For example, without rare earth, the much touted US sixth generation fighter program F-47 will be dead in the water. Can the US turn the dream of reindustrialization into reality in the critical rare earth industry to reduce dependency on China? What would such a test case tell us about its prospects to become a manufacturing powerhouse again? Let's dive in. Rare earths are silvery gray metals. There are 17 of them, ranging from lanthanum, atomic number 57, to lithium, atomic number 73, and most of them are in their own row in the periodic table because of their unusual atomic structure. By the way, President Trump, the periodic table is not to be confused with ladies' monthly cycles. Okay. The arrangement of electrons can give them remarkable properties such as luminescence used for the screens of smartphone. Okay, Joe. I have to mute myself a bit.
Okay, you'd like me to take over for a while? Okay, going on with the article. Their arrangement of electrons could give them remarkable properties such as uh, um, uh, um, uh, uh, luminescence used for the screens of smartphones uh, uh, and magnetism. They're often added to other metals in small amounts to enhance their performance. For example, if you have a magnet, okay, with rare earths in it, it can be 15 times as powerful as those that don't have rare earths. Despite their name, the rare earth elements, REE, aren't particularly rare. They're just difficult to extract. This group of 17 elements can be found on Earth's crusts in many places around the world. What's special about REE is their unique properties that make them essential in high-tech production. Here is an incomplete list of products that need some rare earth elements to make: smartphones, semiconductors, then there's aircraft engines, electric vehicles, wind turbines, uh, uh, also robotics, fiber optic cables, guided missiles, high frequency radars, avionics and flight control systems, thermal barrier coatings, sensors and optics, drone and rocket, infrared night vision goggles, precision lasers, and armor piercing tank shells. I think we'll all agree that's quite a list. And it's an incomplete list, as Wabin says. The rare earth industry happens to be one that China dominates. Reserve advantage. China holds the biggest share of global REE reserves at 37%, roughly 44 million tons. Then there's the area of mining dominance. China accounted for 186,000 tons out of 240,000 global production. representing 70% of the total mining of rare earth elements. Next, processing and refining monopoly. China dominates roughly 90% of global REE processing, turning raw ores into usable oxides, also metals, and magnets. For heavy rare earths such as terbium, ytterbium, and yttrium, China's dominance is absolute at 100%. And the heavy REEs, also known as HREEs or HREEs, are especially important in high-tech and military applications, e.g. jet engine coating. Production concentration. 6 state-owned companies, that is Chinese companies, control 90% of the REE industry in China, such as China Northern Rare Earth and Shangyi Resources. Refining facilities are concentrated in 2 provinces. One is Inner Mongolia and also Jiangxi in southern China. But dominance in every part of the supply chain. China's rare earth strength extends from mines, extraction, separation to processing and production, a final product, such as uh, uh, magnets. China owns proprietary mining, separation, and processing technologies, and develops most of the specialized chemicals, also machinery, tooling, and equipment. China has by far the largest pool of REE scientists, engineers, and technicians in the world. Also, China has control over the global supply chain. As mentioned, rare earth elements are found in many places, including Vietnam, Australia, in Myanmar, and the US. But even non-Chinese mines send ores to China for processing, for technical know-how and processing facilities. For example, the Mountain Pass mine in California used to send most of its ores to China for processing before the tariff war. Uh-oh. Cost and quality competitiveness. Due to the large scale of REE production and processing in China, as well as its control over key technologies, Chinese producers are the most competitive in cost and quality. Chinese producers dictate REE price in the global market, which actually is quite small compared with more commonly used minerals such as lithium, nickel, or copper, given the niche nature of the product. Guess what? The U.S. military relies on Chinese rare earth elements to produce much of its arsenal. Wow. Are you getting the feeling here, okay, as I'm getting the feeling, that we really should never pick a fight with China?
Yeah.
I mean, because if we don't knock out China within 4 or 5 months, we're not going to have a military left going on. According to a recent CSIS report, REEs are crucial for a range of defense technologies, including F-35 fighter jets, Virginia and Columbia class submarines, also Tomahawk missiles, radar systems, also Predator unmanned aerial vehicles, and the Joint Direct Attack uh, uh, um, uh, 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 the munition series of smart bombs. That's JDEM or JDAM series of smart bombs. You've heard of JDAMs, I'm sure. For example, the F-35 fighter jet contains over 900 pounds of REEs. An Arleigh Burke class DDG-51 destroyer requires 5,200 pounds of REEs, while a Virginia class submarine uses around 9,200 pounds of REEs. CSIS report gave examples such as how U.S. fighter jets depend on China-sourced REE in the form of magnets and stealth coating, engine coating. For example, uh, the element known as yttrium is required for high temperature jet engine coatings, such that thermal barrier coatings on turbine blades stop aircraft engines from melting in mid-flight. Back in 2022, the Pentagon temporarily suspended deliveries of F-35 jets after Lockheed acknowledged an alloy made in China was in a component of the jet, violating federal defense rules of acquisition. But it had to provide an exemption for Lockheed and resume delivery because no replacement could be found. Pentagon ended up violating U.S. laws in order to build weapons to fight China with parts sourced from China. CSIS pointed out this is akin to buying bullets from your enemy to fight the same, to fight the enemy, the same enemy. On the other side, most Chinese have come to think that Chinese companies selling such minerals to U.S. military-industrial complex need to be tried for treason, but that's another story. According to Govini, a defense acquisition information firm, China's tightening export controls on critical minerals could hit more than 3/4 of the U.S. weapons supply chain. So here's Trump. It is said that Trump is trying to settle the Ukraine war and trying to settle the conflict with Iran and trying to settle the Gaza conflict, actually, get the Israelis to settle the Gaza conflict so we could have peace in West Asia, so we can turn to East Asia to fight China. Boy, what a prospect. I mean, what are we going to fight with that with? Sticks and stones? Pitchforks? In a report titled From Rock to Rocket, Critical Minerals and the Trade War for National Security, a short 11-page document readily available online, Govini identified 80,000 weapons parts that were made using antimony, gallium, germanium, tungsten, or tellurium, the global supply of which are all dominated by China. Quote, meaning nearly 78% of all Pentagon weapon systems are potentially affected, unquote. Quote, China's recent export bans and restrictions on critical minerals have exposed an open secret. Despite the political rhetoric of the U.S. is fundamentally dependent on China for essential components of its weapon systems, unquote. These materials are critical in manufacturing military equipment across all services, from 61.7% of the Marine Corps weapons to 91.6% of the Navy's weapons. In the past 15 years, the use of the five minerals in U.S. weapons has increased by an average of 23.2% per year, according to the report. Some of the key components named in the report included the use of antimony in the infrared focal plane arrays of the F-35's uh, 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 its missile warning system, but gallium in advanced AN/SPY 6 radars, germanium in nuclear detection systems, and the Javelin missiles, the infrared optics, tungsten in armor-piercing tank shells, and also tellurium in the thermoelectric generators on RQ-21 Blackjack drones. Wow. The report examined the whole production process of 1,900 weapon systems and found China was involved in the bulk of the supply chains, ranging from 82.4% in the case of germanium to 91.2% for tellurium. I have only one question. What the hell have our military planners been doing all these years? But developing weapons that require the use of rare earth elements uh, that are dominated by China. I mean, what have they been doing? Don't they understand planning? Don't they understand sourcing? I mean, it seems like there's no connection between our sourcing, our planning, and State Department foreign policy. Our thinking about who are our rivals and opponents in this world. Going on. It is said only 19% of the antimony needed for U.S. weapon systems was available outside China. So right there, we have to get rid of 81% of our weapon systems, unless we can find alternative suppliers, for uh, um, 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 antimony. I'm sure there's one alternative supplier, that we could rely on, except that they're extremely close allies with China. What I mean by that, of course, is Russia. They
Yeah, I
have
was going to say that, Russia.
they have plenty of antimony there. Hi, you're back.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, would you like to continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Quote, this heavy reliance on Chinese refined antimony not only exposes critical defense supply chains to potential political and economic leverage, but may also drive up cost and delay production timelines for U.S. military platforms, the report added. Here is a breakdown of the U.S. weapon systems dependent on just three China-dominated REEs: antimony, gallium, and germanium. DoD parts requiring antimony, 6,335. Gallium, 11,351. Germanium, 12,000. 777. Weapon systems impacted: the Navy 501, the Army 267, Air Force 193, Marines 113, and the Coast Guard 1. There are 12,486 supply chains that support the production of the 1,000 plus weapons systems made with antimony, gallium, and or germanium. 87% of those supply chains, 10,829, rely on a Chinese supplier at some point. Whoa.
And here's a graphic showing the reliance on supply chains
Mm,
with at least one Chinese supplier. I mean, I think this article is a comedy show, only it's not very funny,
no.
at least not from the point of view of national defense.
The report said, quote, "The loop is closing. Even antimony mined in Australia becomes unusable for US systems as it has to be refined in China. The result, 88% of DoD's critical mineral supply chains are exposed to Chinese influence." Quote, "America's dependence on China for critical minerals represents a glaring and growing strategic vulnerability. Unless addressed, that vulnerability may soon define the limits of U.S. deterrence, not in dollars or troop strength, but in elemental scarcity."
Absolutely. I guess I
Hmm.
have to comment here. Of course, the first inclination is to say, uh, how did our stable genius get into this particular situation? Okay, but of course, it's not only our stable genius that has led us into this problem,
Mm.
but as well, uh, uh, democratic geniuses going way, way back. I mean, obviously, this is not a new problem.
No.
It's been a problem that we've had, I don't know, for 40 or 50 years, gradually developing, getting more and more serious, and no one paying any attention to it. Please go on.
Since the report's publishing, Beijing's export bans have expanded to include tungsten and tellurium. Most recently, Beijing put additional HREEs under export control, including,
I think you forgot to mention seven HREEs,
okay, additional 7, okay,
additional
in-
seven.
including samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium.
Yep.
Can the U.S. build a rare earth industry? What would this test case say about its prospect to revive manufacturing? As discussed, rare earth metals can be found in many places. The key is the ability to extract and process them. There is no heavy rare earth separation and processing in the United States at present. MP Materials, the only U.S. rare earth mine, can produce at full scale, quote, current plus planned, what Chinese produces in one day, according to the New York Times. Clearly, this is an industry the U.S. needs to build. For the U.S. to do so, it needs to go through a number of steps. Prospect mine deposits, including the Phantom mines set to be in Ukraine or Greenland, permitting process, and environmental assessments, as rare earth production is high environment impact, a process that could take many years under current regulations. Develop the extraction, separation, and processing technologies such as chemical leaching of REE ores and thermal extraction. Build the specializing tools, chemicals, machinery, and equipment. Build the processing plants and facilities with related infrastructure. Develop a skilled engineering workforce. Much like the semiconductor supply chain, where ASML and TSMC dominate the tooling and production process, China owns most of the proprietary technologies, equipment, and processes in REE industry. REE sits on the upstream of semiconductor production as a key input. As a reciprocal move for the chip ban, the U.S. has put on China. China has imposed the same restrictions on the flow of rare earth related technologies and machinery to the U.S. In December 2023, China imposed a ban of REE extraction and separation technologies. It had a notable impact on developing REE supply chain capabilities outside of China, as China possesses specialized technical expertise in this field that other countries do not. For instance, it has an absolute advantage in solvent extraction processing techniques for rare earths, an area where other countries have faced challenges both in implementing advanced technological operations and in addressing environmental concerns. Beijing has sent a clear message. While the U.S. might attempt to cut China off from the most advanced chips and other cutting edge technologies, China could go one step further by cutting off the supply chain upstream. Even if the U.S. can overcome such restrictions and develop its own technologies, the process of building out the factories and facilities will take years, if not decades. Its cost and quality competitiveness with China will remain a wide gap, perhaps in perpetuity. Meanwhile, the gap between China and the rest of the world in REE mining and refining is getting wider. In March, a new technological breakthrough called electrokinetic mining, (EKM), led by researcher at the Guangzhou Institute of Geochemistry under the Chinese Academy of Science, is developed to increase extraction efficiency to 95% while reducing energy use by 60%, reducing leaching agent by 80% and extraction time by 70%.
Wow.
Importantly, according to CSIS, there are dozens of universities and technical schools in China that offer majors in REE mining, extraction, and processing. The human capital pool for REE in China is enormous. In contrast, there is not a single university major in the U.S. that offers technical training in REE mining and processing. To summarize, it's unlikely the U.S. can build a rare earth industry that can meet its high-tech and military needs and compete with China in the next decade. It cannot afford to disrupt global supply chains without jeopardizing its own economic and technological ambitions. Reindustrializing the U.S. may seem simple to New York real estate developer or Wall Street finances. The cold reality is that they have no clue how industry actually works. No, they don't. In fact, most Americans have become disconnected from manufacturing. They don't really understand what modern manufacturing requires. The ambition to restore American industry is real, but the tools Trump leans on are rooted in economics and finance, very bad economics and finance at that, not industry. If the U.S. truly wants to make manufacturing, to bring manufacturing back, it needs to rebuild the entire ecosystem to support it. This isn't about fixing a single sector. Adjusting a policy direction or ramping up a specific capability, let alone just raising tariffs. It would first need to build new factories, purchase equipment, train workers, build supporting infrastructure, and develop manufacturing processes. That alone would take years and generate little to no output at the start. The upfront investment could easily run into many billions, and all of it would be built into the final cost. And this is assuming they have the know how to do it. Reshoring manufacturing is a long, painful journey. It requires consensus across society, from government, educational institutions, to industrial policy and infrastructure. It means we're building capability across the board. This isn't a 4-year term project. It's a 20 or 30-year commitment. China has gone through its industrialization over the past 40 plus years with thorough and persistent government planning and commitment. And even with that, the results zig and zag depending on industry. The same simply won't happen in the US political system today. As I wrote before, China's rise as a global factory is not by accident, but meticulous industrial planning. Take Made in China 2025, MIC 2025, as an example. It took a decade-long focus of investment and execution to achieve quantitative tangible targets set for 10 industries with 260 plus specific metrics.
Okay, and there is a link to another article, by Wabin at his Substack called "Revisiting Made in China 2025" by MIC 25. Okay, please go on.
Okay. To be blunt, that level of state capacity for large scale, long term planning doesn't exist outside of China. After losing to China in free market capitalism, Trump and Biden before him has turned to state planning to compete with China. CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, or Stargate, they may sport fancy marketing slogans, but I doubt they have any staying power. Trump already has deconstructed much of what Biden put together. China's rare earth dominance is a great example. China has achieved the pole position because it had planned decades ago to control the most critical parts of the supply chain for high-end manufacturing, such as EV, wind turbines, smartphones, chips, and military hardware. China can do this because its national and local leaders are mostly engineers by training who understand the importance of such bolts and nuts matters like rare earth, the refining process technologies, and their importance to industries of the future. Each of the past 3 leaders in China had an engineering degree. Jiang Zemin, with mechanical engineering degree from Shanghai Jiantang University, Hu Jianshou, and Xi Jinping with hydro engineering and chemical engineering degrees from Zhanghua University. You simply cannot expect politicians trained as lawyers or financiers who don't even know what a periodic table is to have the ability to make such decisions. Let's be honest, making stuff is much harder than stock speculation or running a printing press for little green pieces of paper with dead presidents' portraits. Trump's Ukraine mineral deal and wish for annexation of Greenland are both pursued with the hope to obtain rare earth deposits, which are now proven by any means. Which are not proven by any means. Even if Trump gets his mineral deals with Ukraine, annex Greenland, and have all the access to rare earth deposits, none of the above issues regarding technology, talents, and scale are solved. The rare earth case also illustrates the fundamental difference between long-term and short-term planning between Chinese and U.S. businesses. U.S. businesses are short-term, profit-driven, while state-owned Chinese businesses are long-term, goal-driven. For industries such as rare earth, which demands a long investment horizon, years and decades of development, U.S. businesses are inherently more likely to cede ground to China. The rare earth case shows the U.S. is unlikely able to reindustrialize in most critical industries when it is dependent on China. What would happen when it goes to war with an opponent from which it has to source the critical raw material for its war machine? The U.S. is planning to go to war with China, which is not only its bankers, the largest creditor, but also, in a perverse way, its ultimate arms dealer. What happens when the money and the arms stop? The Trump regime can happily consult with Vladimir No Cards Zelensky.
Okay, so
Mm,
I guess my first comment on all this is probably the most important article we've encountered here in a very long time.
it is. I agree.
It's an article that screams checkmate when you're talking about uh, a foreign policy of the United States that has as its goal uh, armed competition with China, military competition with China. Now, we may be able to compete in specific industries and specific areas of science, okay, and in other critical areas. Okay, but clearly, the kind of reindustrialization some of us, have been re-envisioning, uh, which would allow us to compete with China on a broad scale sort of level, requires developing this industry focused on the rare earths. And that is a very long term sort of process.
Mm,
And it's going to involve industrial policy that is very exacting and very precise. And we don't have much going on in the area, of industrial policy. And Trump doesn't seem very much inclined to treat that sort of problem. The article mentions that Trump is doing something, of course, but he's not doing as much in the area as Biden was doing. And what Biden was doing was totally inadequate and barely a start, okay, of any kind. Uh, the article ends by saying, what happens when the money in the arms stop? Well, of course, the money will never stop because the United States is a monetary sovereign. So it doesn't really matter if China uh, 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 should dump our bonds. It doesn't, even matter if the rest of the world prefers to use uh, some other currency or an international reserve currency rather than the dollar, uh, because we can fulfill our domestic needs with dollars here. Okay, so even changes in the currency regime are not really very important in the long run. But uh, when we're talking about sourcing the real raw materials we need to build so much of our technology, we either have to develop a rare earths industry, and we know that's going to take, as Wabin says, many years, uh, certainly a decade, maybe decades, plural. What does that imply? It implies that we're in no shape to do anything except to make nice with China, make peace with China. Okay, accept the fact that China is going to be the leading economy of the world. And meanwhile, we have a lot of work to do, taking decades for us to become competitive with China. Uh, Even the least bit competitive with China over the long run. Becoming competitive with China is also going to take a completely different foreign policy. It's going to have to be a collaborative foreign policy with China, with Russia, with the rest of the world. We're going to have to stop coercing other nations uh, uh, with our military. We're going to have to totally reform uh, our military and totally reform our foreign policy so that it emphasizes diplomacy and emphasizes trade and business and the economic aspects. And that's going to have to mesh with the domestic economic policy. That's going to have to be focused on industrial policy and planning. We're talking about very, very long-term efforts. We cannot even contemplate contesting with China over the short term. That's going to be very damaging to us and a kind of national suicide. We need to forget it. And this article highlights one very good reason why we need to forget that. Any further comments, Dee?
I don't even know why the US would even think they would have the ability to get into some kind of battle with China, knowing who controls the resources. China controls the ability of our military to function.
Yes.
It makes no sense at all.
It makes no sense at all. No sense at all. We have a number of comments.
Yes.
Okay. Evelina says short-sighted at 9:13. And at 9:20, she says lots of catching up to do. Dawn Forster says, hi, I'm a little late, but I shared. Thank you, Dawn. Evelina says, are any of these REE state-owned factories in Taiwan? No. The REE state-owned factories mentioned are all in China, in mainland China. Robert Copeland says, hi, hey, Robert Copeland, haven't seen you in a while. I see nothing has been changed while in the last few months while I was away. Well, lots of things have been changed, but probably in a direction that you do not favor, Robert. L. Stephen Day says the case for a job guarantee, Pavlina R. Chernova, published in 9 languages, Okay, I have to mention the original publication, okay, in English, if I recall correctly, was in 2019 or 2020. And I devoted 3 live streams to a discussion, okay, of that. For some reason, my image seems to be frozen. I have no idea why. Maybe it will come back. I'm sure my sound is okay, D, isn't it? Hello, D.
Oh, your sound is perfect.
Thank you. As long as my sound is perfect, it's okay. But my image doesn't, my mouth doesn't seem to be moving, nor is my head changing positions as I'm.
No, it's not. You're stuck.
So it seems to be rather wild here. So Evelyn says, did Trump talk about war with China? I can't recall. No, he's never talked about war with China, but it's generally accepted that the long-term goal of U.S. foreign policy uh, uh, envisions war with China somewhere along the line. Maybe not this year or next year. But of course, our long term support for the independence of Taiwan is a trigger for war with China. Because from the Chinese point of view, Taiwan is part of China, and we are interfering in the internal affairs of China uh, by supporting the independence movements inside of Taiwan. So that is very important. So let us move on now to a bunch of articles by Larry Johnson, and Dee and I will alternate
Okay.
in taking up these articles. So I'm going to share the screen for the first of these, which is called Trump Still Does Not Understand What Russia Wants and Demands. This one was done a week ago on May 10th. And there's a picture of Putin speaking. 1 hour after Russia ended its 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine, President Putin met with a gaggle of reporters in Moscow at 0135 hours Moscow time and made news by offering to meet uh, up, with Ukrainian officials without preconditions on May 15th, in Istanbul. Putin's offer is a shrewd move, but is unlikely to be accepted by Ukraine. First, Zelensky will have to repeal his decree of September 2022, prohibiting any Ukrainian official from talking to the Russians. Second, the US and Europeans are now demanding an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. I think Putin's offer for direct talks with Ukraine was the way to say politely, but firmly, reject the Western demand. The West, in turn, is not going to let their organ grinder monkey, Mr. Zelensky, accept such an offer. But Vladimir Putin repeats the phrase, quote, root causes, unquote. While Mr. Putin has not consulted me, says Larry Johnson, nor am I privy to his thoughts on the matter, let me attempt to explain what I think that means. The root cause of this conflict dates back to 1997, when NATO made Ukraine a de facto member of its alliance. That is when the first formal agreement on military cooperation was signed. excuse me, and it marks the time when NATO and USCU began using Yavoriv, the Ukrainian military base near the Polish border, as a headquarters and operations center for military exercises. In other words, the expansion of NATO to the east is the root cause of the current war. Ending the war in Ukraine will require, sorry, I scrolled too much, more than a pinky swear that it will never join NATO. If I am a negotiator for the Russians, I will demand that all NATO personnel be withdrawn from Ukraine, that all Ukrainian military and intelligence personnel will be proscribed from training with NATO forces, that all Western military aid supplied to Ukraine be destroyed, that all intelligence sharing with Ukraine cease, and that NATO bases in Poland and Romania be closed. Russia prefers to achieve these objectives through negotiation, but if that avenue is closed, Russia will do it um, 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 militarily. Russia must make NATO too costly to continue operating. Trump reportedly approved the shipment via German supplies of ATACMS and Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Apparently, he and his advisors stupidly believe that this will pressure Russia to make concessions and come begging for an unconditional ceasefire. It ain't going to happen. Russia will intensify military operations to destroy these supplies, even if it means killing NATO soldiers and officers um, um, in the process. And there's a note, okay, about a journalist who is evidently very brave and also beautiful, but I'm not going to read that because it's not on our critical path for this particular stream. So I thought that was very much out there, okay, very direct, and it points to a problem. Not only does Trump not understand what Russia wants and demands, but furthermore, he still doesn't really understand the capabilities of Russia to get uh, what it wants.
Mhm.
He's still refusing to cut off aid and supplies to Ukraine, which at this stage of the negotiations with Putin is what Putin wants to see Trump do. In other words, Putin won't make any agreements with Trump until he gets proof of the seriousness of Trump, okay, in terms of wanting peace. And that proof has to be stopping the U.S. contribution to the war in Ukraine. And there is no other way in order to get this done. Let's check and see if there are any comments on this. I don't think they are. So let's get on with the next of our pieces. The title of this one, is about the journalist I just spoke of, by the name of Elizaveta.
Okay.
And there is her picture, but again, uh, 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 her efforts uh, are not on the critical path of this stream. So we will skip that and go to the second part of the article.
You
Uh,
can put the article in the room.
Thank you. I will put the article in the room. I will share it. If you pick
Okay.
it up, D, from shifting gears,
Okay, shifting gears, President Trump posted the following today on Truth Social. I am happy to announce that Eden Alexander, an American citizen who has been held hostage since October 2023, is coming home to his family. I am grateful to all those involved in making this monumental news happen. This was a step taken in good faith towards the United States and the efforts of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to put an end to this very brutal war and return all living hostages and remains to their loved ones. Hopefully, this is the first of those final steps necessary to end this brutal conflict. I look very much forward to the day of celebration. Notice that Trump says nothing about Israel. The tensions appear genuine, especially in light of what Bibi Netanyahu reportedly said today in a closed meeting of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. Says here, I think we will have to withdraw from American security assistance.
so this is the reported breach between Trump, okay, and Netanyahu. Okay, please go on, D, from where it says Hamas.
Hamas says Eden's release is aimed at achieving a ceasefire, stopping Zionist attacks on Gaza, and allowing aid into Gaza. Netanyahu, however, insists that the war on Gaza will continue despite the hostage release. Looks like Netanyahu is forcing Trump to make a choice. I'm hoping that Trump's desire to score a victory by securing a hostage release on the eve of his visit to Saudi Arabia will compel him to truly distance himself from Bibi. Hebrew media reports that Israel was not aware of contacts to release Israeli American prisoner Eden Alexander and was not involved in the negotiations. This may be another sign that the rift between Trump and Netanyahu is genuine. There are a number of mainstream Israelis, including former generals and intelligence officers, who are becoming more and more vocal in condemning Netanyahu. Securing Eden's release is going to put more pressure on Netanyahu. Whether that leads to an end of the genocide in Gaza is another matter. Meanwhile, in Oman, Steve Witkoff and Iran's Foreign Minister, Mr. Arghachi, completed their fourth round of direct and indirect talks with the Sultan of Oman mediating. Arghachi says continuing nuclear enrichment is, quote, non-negotiable, but Iran is open to dialing it back. Witkoff, representing Donald Trump, reportedly is insisting on a complete elimination of any enrichment program. While the two sides appear firm in their respective positions, which suggests no deal can be reached, both sides agree to meet again. It appears that Trump is backing away from his threats to go to war with Iran. In a related development, the B-2 bombers deployed to Diego Garcia have returned to their base in the United States. However, this does not mean the B-2s could not be ordered to carry out a bombing in Iran. They are quite capable of flying from the U.S. to Iran if given the orders. Putting them on Diego Garcia was intended to intimidate Iran. Apparently, that failed.
And just a comment on that here. Uh, yes, the B 2s could be ordered to carry out a bombing raid to fly from here to Iran. But to fly from here to Iran is a very long trip
Mhm,
because the speed of the B 2 bombers is subsonic. It's about 650 miles per hour.
mhm,
And going from the US to Iran at 650 miles per hour means very lengthy warning time
Mm-hmm.
to the Iranians to retaliate, okay, and to get ready, and even to perhaps send a few expeditions, to Diego Garcia, certainly to retaliate against our bases
Mm-hmm.
even before the B-2s arrive. Because the Iranians would certainly get satellite warning, from the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
that an attack is commencing.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that the B-2 bombers have returned to their base in the United States, and that the B-52s, uh, some of the B-52s have also gone back to the United States,
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of standing down.
Yes.
And it suggests that Trump is now looking for an agreement. Now, since this article was written, there's news, that the Iranians have said they're willing to give up, on all enrichment beyond the 3.67%, which is necessary for nuclear power. In other words, they insist on continuing to have the nuclear power plants and to operate those in Iran. Okay, but even the 20% enrichment that's required, for medical kinds of applications, they're willing to forego that and to place uh, the enriched product they have now, in the hands of the Russians, with the promise, of course, that if we break the agreement, then the uranium stocks, which Iran had, would be returned over to Iran. Okay, but I believe the Ayatollah himself, the supreme leader, announced that they are willing to do that. Uh, so Trump does have to back off from his insistence of no enrichment at all.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a uh, pretty forward move on the part of the Iranians to seek an agreement. And Trump, on the other hand, has already stood down, and he has the Houthi experience to teach him that it would be very difficult to have a war with Iran. So I personally think that the outlook for perhaps concluding an agreement with Iran, uh, uh, with Iran, is now very favorable, even more so given the break of Trump and Netanyahu, because it doesn't seem to me right now that if the Israelis were to embark on a solo attacks on Iran, uh, I don't think the U.S. would be so quick to join anymore. Okay. Anyway, uh, the final sentences on this. Harry Chuck
Okay.
says, "I believe the talks this week with the Saudis, the Qataris, okay, and the United Arab Emirates could persuade Trump to seek a deal with Iran and pressure Netanyahu to end the genocide. I would not wage a large sum of money on that outcome.
Mm.
I am just looking for a silver lining. Yes, I think that would be a very tough thing to accomplish. But maybe somewhere down the road, when the break between Trump, okay, and Netanyahu is very, very clear, and when the Israeli resistance to Netanyahu is successful and someone else, okay, is running Israel, that may present the opportunity for the ending of the genocide. Okay, I certainly hope so. Let's check in on our comments again, Dee.
Okay.
No further comments yet. Our attendance seems to be steady at 36. Hang on for a minute. I'm going to refresh my screen and see if that gives any movement to myself.
Okay.
Okay, hang in there, Dee, please. I am back, and I am now. My picture is working again, so
Yes.
I guess.
You're now flexible. You're not flexible. You're not stiff.
Okay, the walker you see in the background here, of course, is Bonnie's walker.
Yes.
Okay, so did Trump talk? Oh, Evelina asks, did you say any Chinese state-owned companies are in Taiwan? No. No, they are not in Taiwan, Evelina, to answer your question. Okay, let me get this set this up a little differently. Okay, that's, I think, a little more centered. So let's go on with the next piece. It's also from Larry Johnson. And this is connected to the first article we saw, because, of course, to reindustrialize, we are certainly going to have to get serious about our education system. And this next article is called, it was done on May 15th, and it's called, If Ignorance is Bliss, the U.S. is the happiest superpower. This is a very sarcastic title, of course. These are the literacy rates by state, okay, in the United States. You'll notice they vary all over the lot. States with a high percentage of migrants have, low literacy rates. California, for example, is 76.9%. I assume these are literacy rates, okay, in English. Texas is at 81.0%. Florida is 80.3%. If we go up to New York, that's 77.9%. Are there any places lower than New York?
Try Virginia.
Virginia is at 88%, considerably above New York. Certain states are in the highest category, 94% plus. Those states are New Hampshire at 90.1%. I'm sorry, 94.2%. And Minnesota at 94.0%. Then there's a second category from 88% to 93.9%. The state of Maine, for example, is at 92.6%. Vermont is 93.4%. State of Massachusetts is 90.1%, Rhode Island 91.5%, Connecticut 91.4%. Then there were a whole bunch of states in a range from 82 to 87.9%, including such states as New Jersey, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, also Maryland. Virginia's at 88%. Ohio 90.9%, Indiana 92.0%, 91.7%. I'm not going to go through all the states, but you can see there's a very wide range. The state with the lowest percentage is California,
Really?
76.9%. And the next lowest state is New York at 77.9%. Larry says, knowledge is power. And the key to knowledge, I forgot to include Alaska, 90.8%, and Hawaii, 84.1%. And the key to knowledge is literacy of the population. I'll put the bottom line up front. Compared to Russia and China, the United States is a relatively illiterate country. This has profound implications for the future of the United States and its quest to remain the hegemon. I would say it has implications for the future of the United States and its quest to just remain a developed nation compared to other nations. Let me give you 3 historical markers, says Larry, 1925, 1955, and 2024. See if you can spot the trend. In 1925, the literacy rate in China was extremely low, estimated at around 15% or less, with some sources suggesting it could have been as low as 5 to 10%, depending on the region and methodology used. Now, of course, when we're talking about, literacy rate in China, we're talking about, literacy rate in Chinese or in the various languages of China, not, literacy rates in English. Just wanted to make that clear. In 1925, Russia, then part of the Soviet Union, had a literacy rate of approximately 40 to 50%, a significant improvement from pre-revolutionary times, but still uneven across regions and demographics. In 1925, the United States had an estimated literacy rate of around 90 to 95% for the white population, though with significant racial and regional disparities. Now, a high proportion of the population in 1925 was an immigrant population, because a huge number of immigrants came over between 1890 and 1920. But most of them learned to read. Going on with the article, Black literacy was estimated at 60 to 70%, improving since 1870, but hindered by Jim Crow laws and underfunded segregated schools, especially in the South. 1955, literacy rate in China, 1955 is estimated to have been around 20 to 28%. In 1955, the literacy rate in the Soviet Union, including the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, the RSFSR, was estimated to be around 98%. In 1955, the literacy rate in the United States was estimated to be around 97% for adults aged 15 and over. So in other words, in 1955, our literacy rate was almost the equivalent to the Soviet Union, and it was at 97%. As of 2024, China's adult literacy rate, ages 15 and above, is estimated to be approximately 97%. This figure reflects a steady increase from previous decades, with a literacy rate recorded at 96.74% in 2020. Notably, the youth literacy rates, ages 15 to 24 in China, has reached 100% since 2010, indicating that literacy is universal among younger generations. As of 2024, approximately 79% of U.S. adults are considered literate, meaning they possess basic reading and writing skills. This indicates that about 21% of adults in the United States are classified as illiterate. 54% of adults read below a sixth grade level, with 20% reading below a fifth grade level. If Donald Trump is serious about Make America Great Again, or MAGA, the problem is not lack of manufacturing jobs. It is something more profound. The trend in the United States is unmistakable. We are literally dumbing down, which I think explains why we voted in people like Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The ability to read at an 8th grade level translates into one's ability to do critical thinking. The comparative statistics. Oh, Bonnie is going crazy here.
Yeah, I just read something. Trump wants to run another 4 years.
Yes.
And it's against the law.
Yeah, we've known that for a long time, that he wants to run again for another 4 years, and that it's against the law. Of course, it's against the Constitution. The comparative statistics on literacy rates in Russia, China, and the United States is a damning indictment of the supposed superiority of the Western system of capitalism. Frankly, I was shocked by the U.S. numbers. We're living in an age where information and knowledge are more widely available any time in human history, and that wealth of information is growing with each passing year. Yet an estimated 25% of Americans are incapable of reading and deciphering written instructions that accompany products that one can assemble in the privacy of their own home. Excuse me, my nose has started running for an unknown reason. There are a couple of advantages with an illiterate population, says Larry Johnson. They're easier to bamboozle and manipulate. The physical act of reading words, regardless of the language, wires neural pathways in the brain, which are essential to developing critical thinking skills. Now I understand why Donald Trump speaks the way he does, not because he is illiterate or uneducated, but he apparently understands that a large swath of the American public has the literary skills of a sixth grader. In the year 2000, the literacy rate in the United States was estimated to be approximately 99% for individuals aged 15 and above. More detailed assessments, such as the National Adult Literacy Survey, NALS, conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics, provide a nuanced understanding of literacy skills. These surveys categorize adults into different proficiency levels. Level 1, below basic literacy skills. Level 2 is basic literacy skills. Level 3 is intermediate literacy skills. And level 4 is advanced literacy skills. While the exact distribution of U.S. adults across these levels in 2000 is not readily available, subsequent surveys have shown that a significant portion of the adult population struggles with higher level literacy tasks. For instance, the 2013 program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, the PIAAC survey revealed that approximately 21% of U.S. adults performed at or below level 1 in literacy, indicating challenges with tasks requiring more complex reading and comprehension skills. For my readers who live outside the United States, I wonder if you are as shocked by these numbers as I am, or if you already suspected it to be the case. I had a great chat with Garland Nixon today on the latest developments in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. I'll skip that, of course. Okay, the initial comment on that is, how can we expect to reindustrialize? Oh, by the way, my indicator says there's only one person here. I wonder what happened. But anyway, there were 36 people here. I don't think I ended the broadcast before.
No, you didn't. Well, let me just go check over to X. I'm going to go over to X and see what it says.
Okay. Okay, but just to make this comment, obviously, if we're going to reindustrialize, we can't do it, with literacy rates around 76%. We can start the process that way. But ultimately, if we're going to reindustrialize into a modern economy, such as the Chinese are building, we're going to have literacy rates close to the literacy rates in China and Russia, and probably in most of the European nations. I'm sure. I'm now showing 30, 36, 38.
Yeah, because on X you have 33.
Okay, so that's what's happening. So clearly, we need to go back to our educational system, and we have to emphasize basic skills for all people, and do this in adult education too. We need free adult education, and we need to be able to teach people to read, and we need to give them critical thinking skills too, because the critical thinking skills are obviously necessary for democracy. Dawn Foster says, truth be told, they want a dumb election where people get all kinds of misinformation. Dawn Foster says, you just read my point. Yes, it's not just that people get the misinformation. They'll get the misinformation all the time, because the misinformation is going to be out there and politicians are going to convey it. For example, the idea that we need to have austerity because we'll otherwise get into fiscal unsustainability, that is misinformation. We're going to have misinformation like that all the time. To overcome that kind of misinformation, more and more people need critical thinking skills. And those have been in decay in our country. And evidently, a main source of decay has been the last 25 years here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We were at a literacy rate, evidently, that was close to 100% in the year 2000. So our schools have gone to crap, our educational system has gone to crap. And now we're talking about reindustrializing, and our workforce doesn't have the basic skills to reindustrialize into a modern, competitive sort of economy. So this is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to our next piece, which is your turn, D.
Okay. Okay. Let me. Russia promises to double down if Ukraine does not take the offer on the table. 16 May 2025 by Larry C. Johnson.
That was yesterday.
Margarita Simonian says, story has been making rounds that Ukrainians were outraged when Russian negotiators said that Ukrainian soldiers must leave the four new Russian regions as part of a ceasefire, to which the Moscow delegation replied, quote, next time it will be 5. Now, our reporter in Istanbul got to ask the Russian side how it really went down. Quote, we didn't say 5, we said 8.
Okay, so who is Margarita Simonian? She is the publisher and I believe the editor in chief, of Russia Today, RT News.
Okay.
RT, say if you've never read it, is a wonderful outlet. It's full of great columns
Mm-hmm.
and stories. Okay, and uh, uh, Margarita Simonian has built up this publication for years and years now. She's extremely competent. I would even characterize her as a genius. She is really first class. So that's who she is. Please go on, Dee.
The meeting in Istanbul on Friday, May 16th, between Russian and Ukrainian delegations was simply a reminder to Ukraine and NATO that the terms for ending the war, which President Putin laid out in his 14 June 2024 speech to the senior officials of the Russian Foreign Ministry, remain intact, at least for now. In case you missed it, here they are. Territorial concessions. Ukraine must withdraw its forces from the entirety of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia Oblast, including areas not currently under Russian control. NATO neutrality. Ukraine must officially abandon its aspirations to join NATO and adopt a neutral, non-aligned, and non-nuclear status. Sanctions relief. All Western sanctions against Russia must be lifted as part of the peace agreement. Demilitarization and denazification. Future negotiations must include provisions for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, concepts previously discussed during the 2022 Istanbul talks. Protection of Russian-speaking citizens. Ukraine must ensure the rights and freedoms of Russian speaking citizens within its territory. The Russian delegation reportedly told the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian troops must vacate the four oblasts that are now part of the Russian Federation: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, before there can be any discussion of a possible ceasefire. If Ukraine does not take the deal now, the next Russian offer will be more onerous. According to the head of RT, Margarita Simonyan, the Russians informed their Ukrainian counterparts that the new demand will be that Ukraine vacate 8 oblasts. This was not a bluff. The Russians were channeling their inner Walter Brennan, noted for his iconic catchphrases from the 1960s TV show The Guns of Will Sonnet. No brag, just fact. Russia is content to continue the war of attrition because the real threat is not Ukraine. It is the United States and its NATO allies. Ukraine is a pawn of the West, and the Russian leaders understand that. Speaking of attrition, the Russians and Ukrainians are exchanging bodies of dead soldiers at a rate of 27 to 1, i.e., 27 Ukrainians for one Russian soldier. This is the definition of attrition: exchange of bodies of soldiers killed during the Second World War between Russia and Ukraine.
I think that graph is incorrectly labeled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, apparently.
Yeah, and it just shows there's so many.
Yeah, it covers the dates from the 16th of May 2023 to the 16th of May 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the ratio of 27 to 1. The blue lines are the Ukrainian bodies, and the light red lines, are the Russian bodies. And you can see the ratio. Okay, at the start of the war, the ratios were uh, 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 they varied. Sometimes they were equal, but as we get closer to the present, uh, the ratios are increasingly in favor of Russia. Very few Russian bodies and very many of the Ukrainian bodies until now. In April and May of 2025, we're looking at 900 of Ukrainian bodies to only 45 or 43 or 41 or 34
Mm.
um, of the Russian bodies. Very
Well,
striking figures indicating the fatalities much, much heavier on the Ukrainian side, than on the Russian side.
Western hopes to isolate Russia and compel it to accept an unconditional ceasefire were dashed against the rockets of Russia's firm resolve in Istanbul. Zelensky and his European pals are howling with outrage, but Russia does not care. I discussed the negotiations as well as developments on the Palestinian Israeli front with Nima and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson in the morning and with Judge Napolitano and Ray McGovern in the afternoon.
And there are the videos right there.
Hmm.
Uh, if anybody wants to see them, they are great videos too. Let us see if we have any further comments. Dawn Foster says yes. I don't think we have any comments on that particular piece, but it was a striking piece about the reality of what is now going on in Ukraine since, and about what the demands of the Russians are going to be if the war goes on. The war will go on, most probably, if the Europeans and we continue our military support for Ukraine. If we shut off the military, okay, then probably Ukrainian efforts will collapse. The benefit of seeing that collapse will be that there will be no more Ukrainian bodies coming back to Ukraine from the Russian side.
Mm-hmm.
That is a desirable outcome at this point, since the Ukrainians have lost over 1 million people. We now move on to some videos. Okay, the first video relates to the speech that was given by Colonel Macgregor last week, which I also covered on Tuesday in my stream on Tuesday. Okay, the video that we'll play now with commentary, of course, is Colonel Danny Davis comment on commentary on Colonel Macgregor's speech. I think that commentary is very important. I will play it now. I will share the screen. Okay, I will share the YouTube. The title of it is Colonel Doug Macgregor's blueprint. America must know. This is from Daniel Davis's channel, known as Deep Dive. Reminds me of the previous title of my show, which used to be the In-Depth Show. But anyway, let me go back to the beginning of this. Take it from the beginning.
Some of the possibilities for conflicts that there, et cetera. And he's always given us good advice and good analysis on what's going on here. There's another side of Doug Macgregor that I think is important for you to be able to see today that's different than you may understand, or certainly different than you may have seen before. And just as full disclosure, I've known Doug for over 30 years. I fought underneath him in the Desert Storm at the Battle of 7th Easting. I was served under his leadership in the 2nd U.S. Armored Cavalry Regiment. We were stationed in Germany and then went to fight in Desert Storm, et cetera. So I obviously have a long relationship with Doug and have seen him under fire and understand that he is the real deal. And one of the reasons we are so eager to have him on the show every week and why we're grateful for that.
Do you want to know where to invest $1,000 right now? Well, forget about AI, quantum computing, electric vehicles.
But he produced a video of his own earlier this week that didn't get a whole lot of visibility and a lot of views when it was running. And I thought that is just not acceptable, because the message that he has here is something every American needs to see. Even if you're just only interested in knowing more about Doug Macgregor, you're going to enjoy what we have for you here today. But
okay, so I agree. It's important for every American to see Doug's video. That's why I have paid such close attention to it here.
Even if you've never heard of him before, this message is one that needs to be seen by every American, because it has to do with our national security. It has to do with what's valuable, what's important, and what's at risk that a lot of people may not realize. Because there's a lot of things going on here that are covered over by a lot of happy talk. and there's some risk underneath the surface that's getting closer to the surface, and something that we need to be aware of before it's too late. First of all, I'm going to show you the opening part of his video where he shows you why he's so adamant and passionate about war, because he's seen it firsthand.
Americans, 34 years ago, it was my honor and privilege to lead American soldiers to victory in battle. To witness the courage and valor of American soldiers at a time and a place when death was all around us. Fortunately, we sustained very few casualties. However, in the years that followed, I watched many of the soldiers I served with pass on, not on foreign battlefields, but on American soil, frequently forgotten by the nation they served. In one case, a major who served with me as a lieutenant in 1993 committed suicide. The memories of the friends he lost in Iraq during a pointless, self-defeating occupation after 2003 were more than he could bear. Yet who today remembers the Iraq War that began in 2003, or that the American military intervention was justified on the utterly false grounds that WMD, that is, weapons of mass destruction, were being built inside Iraq? The conflict took the lives of nearly 4,500 Americans in uniform, not including contractors, of course, and cost $2 trillion. At least 800,000 Iraqi citizens were internally displaced, and several 100,000 Iraqi citizens lost their lives. Tonight, I break my silence, not just for the young officer that committed suicide, but for the wives, husbands, children, and parents who endured the crushing grief of loss, who received a folded flag, and were left alone to trace the name of a loved one on a cold gravestone.
If you think it might rain later, then all you need is this bearskin heavy storm rain jacket. That's because this is the only...
You know, Doug Macgregor is no pacifist. He's not anti-war. He is actually for a strong national defense. He and I are virtually identical on that path. He is for a strong America that needs to have a military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force that can keep us safe from any enemy. And if we're ever attacked, that we have the power and the capacity to defeat that enemy. He's unequivocal on that. And he has seen it firsthand. And I watched him train us for war. I watched him train us during peacetime, even before Saddam Hussein invaded into Kuwait. And then I watched him lead us into war on the front lines. And I promise you, this man was leading from the front, to the point that at one particular point during that battle, on our Eagle Troop internal radio systems, one of my friends, a fellow lieutenant, was getting onto the command radio to ask the commander to say, hey, can you talk to, it was Cougar 3 was his call sign, that he's in front of us and he's masking our first. We can't shoot the enemy because he's in front of our lead scouts. Now, you can talk about the wisdom of whether the second in command of the squadron should have been in front of the lead scouts, but that just shows you his bravery and courage that he displayed there. So this man knows about war. He knows history better than anybody I know, and can make the proper analogies to go on. So his credibility and credentials as understanding war is almost unrivaled in our country today, because he has not just the education and the knowledge, but he also has the practical experience and the demonstrated excellence on the battlefield. That sets him apart. But he also is not for using that instrument unless it is absolutely necessary. And that's one of the things that distinguishes Doug Macgregor, is that he thinks that war should only be chosen as an absolute last resort. And it's important to finish that sentence, because most people stop it right there as a last resort. And then they get to interpret what that means. Well, if I want certain countries to do this and they don't do it, well, the last resort is war. No, that's not what it means. It's not what it ever meant. It's not what he means. He means that what the Constitution means and what our founding fathers meant was that war should only be chosen as an absolute last resort for our security, for our national defense. And that was further codified in 1973 by the War Powers Act, which specified that only if we are attacked can the president use force, or if he gets a declaration of war from the Congress and everybody gets buy into it. But it should never be used as it so often has in the last several decades, as a policy option of first choice. Listen, I have a lot of people don't understand this, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to explain why. I'm not a fan at all when people say, "Thank you for your service." When I go to baseball games, and I see they'll have this thing here at Nationals Park where they say, when everybody, I think it's in the sixth inning, they'll usually have some veterans or somewhere behind home plate, and they'll say, "Hey, everybody, wave your hat to the veterans, and yay, we appreciate all this stuff." I'm really uncomfortable with that because we turn our soldiers into caricatures where it's cool. We don't see what Doug talked about at the end of that first clip there about the cold gravestones, about the anguishing pain that the family members, the survivors, have suffered because of this. And when you're talking about a war that he mentioned there at the second part of that, in the 2003 Iraq War, which was completely fabricated, we were led to war under false pretenses. They knew it and had no problem with our people dying. I'll never forget listening to an interview once with which is Senator. I can't think of his name right offhand. He's passed away, but he was asked on TV because he was a Republican, and they said, "Hey, war weapons of mass destruction weren't there." So it turns out that was all false. So we went to war on a false premise. And he said, "Well, yeah, but Saddam Hussein was a bad guy anyway, so it's cool that we took him out when we needed to." Oblivious to the fact, and one of the other things that distinguishes Doug is that he pointed out that probably more than 800,000 Iraqis were displaced from their homes and hundreds of thousands were killed. He cares about the people on the receiving end of that as well, not just the Americans. But he is keen to point out that Americans suffer great casualties and great cost on a tiny, tiny little minority of our country. And everyone else likes to talk about, "Thank you for your service." Congressmen love to do that. They love to laud the troops and say how much we care about them, and they'll give them pay raises here and there and benefits here and there and feel good about it. But the problem with that, obviously, it's good for any service member when they get some of these benefits. But the problem is that lowers the threshold for war because we honor what they're doing. So if we send them out and do all these things, like right now, they're languishing in open bases in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, and several other places in the Middle East where they're not needed for our national security, and they are at risk. Many have been wounded, some have been killed in just the last year or so on missions that don't matter because we don't seem to care about what happens to those people. And I promise you, the 3 that were killed in Jordan last year, their families are still in anguish to this day. We've moved on. We forgot about it. And we said, well, we fired a bunch of missiles against the guys that did it or whatever. And yay. And then we moved on. They don't get to move on. And the thousands of soldiers that were killed during the Iraq war, the hundreds of thousands that suffered traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, they are still suffering to this day. Some of my good friends are suffering from it to this day. It's egregious suffering. That continues on. No one thinks about those things when they talk about war. And then he's going to move on to the specific issue of this video here, the one that's on the horizon that could happen, and that is with Iran.
Okay, so let's absorb what he said. Let's characterize it. Let's understand it. Okay. Colonel Davis, okay, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, is not a pacifist. Obviously, he's not a pacifist. Colonel Macgregor is obviously not a pacifist. But in a very real and important sense, they are anti-war. When they say war is a last resort, they mean that it's a last resort, and it's only about the defense of the United States. But obviously, based on what Colonel Davis is saying here, he is a warrior who has come to hate war because he understands in a very intimate way what the cost of war is. Coming out of World War II, I think many Americans understood what the cost of war was. Even though the toll of war was fairly light for the United States compared to other nations, certainly compared to Russia, compared to Germany, compared to France, compared to England. But still, there were enough Americans who were killed, who were wounded in the war, that we understood something of the cost of war. But especially since the end of the draft, and since we created conditions where only a very small proportion of our population are in military service, the brush wars we've had for many, many years now have not exposed a large part of our population to war. So for most of us, war is just an abstraction. And we don't have the intimate connection with it, which the warriors who now are anti-war have. And Colonel Davis is expressing his feelings about that here. And in the first part of his presentation, Doug Macgregor was doing the same thing. Now we're going to get to the blueprint aspect of this.
Let me speak plainly about what awaits if Washington chooses war with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Within hours of the first strike, Iran will seal the Strait of Hormuz, choking the artery through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows. Gas prices will not merely rise, they may erupt like a volcano, burning through family budgets. The economic security Americans built with their own hands since the pandemic disaster could be wrecked. Immediate price increases and loss of supplies could also result. Yet the cost in treasure stands as nothing before the cost in blood. Iran is not the Iraq of our past wars. Iran consists of 85 million people, fortified by mountains when the
By the way, it's 92 million people.
Roman Empire was young, defended by modern weapons, and effectively allied with nuclear-armed powers, Russia and China, that have drawn clear and unambiguous red lines. For the first time since missiles stood in Cuba, we face not only the shadow, but the real substance of nuclear confrontation. Not for our country, but for the regional ambitions of a foreign state 7,000 miles from home. We must face the truth that weaker allies often attempt to make their wars our wars. While we assist allies, America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines should not be sacrificed for territorial expansions that serve no vital American strategic interest.
Of course, the nation he's referring to that is 7,000 miles away is Israel. Over a period of years, the nature of Israel has changed. They have become a nation that's looking to expand, to be the hegemon of the Middle East, and to expand their area from the Nile to the Euphrates and north, through Syria. It's a different Israel, that existed in the 1950s and 1960s. I know one can argue that the basic character of Israel has been the same for all this time. But the appetite for expansion has not been the same. When Israel started out, it was looking to survive okay, and looking uh, to defend itself. That was its primary concern, okay, at that time. Changes started to occur after the victory of 1967. And with each passing year, okay, the Israelis grew more aggressive, okay, hegemonic. As the ethnic makeup of Israel changed, and there were more Jews from the North African countries who came. Uh, the population became a lot more aggressive and began to develop the goals of expansion into all parts, okay, of West Asia. That is the situation we see now. And what Doug is talking about is our own soldiers dying, not for our security, but for the ambitions, okay, of Israel.
I did not witness war through the PowerPoint slides or sanitized screens in situation rooms, but through bloody fog of war. I tell you with the full authority of my battlefield experience, this war, if it comes with Iran, is not necessary.
And that is the central point there. I said earlier, we should only use war when it is the absolute last resort to defend us from attack from someone else. Iran is definitely not preparing to attack the United States. The only reason they would use any of their power with us is if we attack them first.
And that is absolutely right. We have 68 bases now that are surrounding Iran. For the most part, they have not attacked any of our bases except in retaliation for attacks on them.
Mm-hmm.
They have not used their considerable power, their considerable missile force, thousands and thousands of missiles, to attack the bases that are surrounding them. They've made no effort also to attack here in the United States at all, to attack our homeland. They are in a posture of defense where we are concerned. We are in a posture of offense where they are concerned.
And if we do, as Doug points out, there's a lot of things that they could do in response. Now, many experts will say they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't shut down the Strait of Hormuz because they need their own oil cells. They need to be able to send that out to get their own cars. And they would be cutting off their own blood supply, basically. Maybe that would be the case. But the problem is that we think we know what they would and wouldn't do. And so people are ready to take all this risk. Obviously, Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, John Bolton, among the biggest cheerleaders for this. Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, huge war lusters. All these guys do whatever they can to push the issue to get war with Iran. It's not in our interests. We don't need to go to war. Then what does? Heard him mention in there, we should not go to war for some distant country 7,000 miles away. Of course, he's talking about Israel. Israel has been lusting to go after Iran forever. They've been trying to do this for a long time. We've shown you scenes over the last year or so from the likes of the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who said this is our once in a 50-year opportunity to go after what he calls the head of the octopus and all these tentacles, etc. We need to go after them. And he even said on one of the shows, we put a clip on there, even if we have to do it by ourselves, we should do it. Well, I don't recommend that. I think it would be a bad idea. But if Israel wants to do that, then that's their prerogative as an independent country. They can choose that, but they don't get to have our armed forces in their pocket. That's what needs to not happen. The United States is not a for rent, should not be a for rent armed services that we give it to one ally to use against their enemy. President Biden did that. He used our military in 2 separate occasions in 2024 to help Israel defend itself, even though Israel had attacked and destroyed an Iranian embassy compound in Syria, which violated every norm and every international law that you can imagine. And then when they responded, and then Israel also assassinated somebody in the streets of Tehran on the presidential inauguration day, somebody they had invited down because Israel considered the guy who was a Hamas leader, they considered him a threat and an enemy. So they chose to attack inside there, something we would never, ever, ever contemplate from any country on the planet, that somebody that we thought was a friend was an enemy of someone else, and that they felt a freedom to assassinate him in Washington, D.C. You know it's true. Even the most fierce advocates for war with Iran would never, under any circumstances, agree that some other country, for their own reasons, which would definitely be in contradiction to ours, that we would say, well, I mean, it was their enemy and the guy wasn't our country. So I guess, whatever. Of course, would never happen. Well, don't expect the Iranians to have a different reaction. And some people think that you can have a limited strike and only take out some of their infrastructure, and that Iran would also respond in a limited way, like they did when the United States assassinated their senior general, Soleimani, like they did in the situation with the destruction embassy, and like they did with when Iran had their measured response before. They were limited. And when Israel countered back, they didn't respond back further. They tried to not escalate. Now, then there's this belief that, well, they never will. And even if we escalate it up and not just hit a couple of targets, but destroy their nuclear infrastructure, that there's not going to be a response. You don't know that. It could be entirely possible that they could do everything that Doug mentioned and even more. There are other options that they could do as well. He didn't even mention the fact that all of our troops in the region there, in Iraq and Syria and Jordan and throughout the rest of the region there, would be at risk of being attacked and killed by Iranians in response. If we go to war with Iran, all of those guys will become vulnerable.
They will become targets of the Iranian missile forces. Thousands and thousands. Thousands of hypersonic missiles that we have no defense against. Literally, we have no defense against those missiles. We cannot knock them out of the sky. Even our THAAD, missile defense systems, are ineffective against the hypersonic missiles the Iranians have. We saw the potency, of the missile and drone forces of the Houthis, against the American aircraft carriers and planes. We finally had to withdraw, our aircraft carriers far away from the Red Sea to save them from the Houthis.
So that is by itself is another big reason.
A simple thumb trick discovered by NASA scientists could be the key to reversing memory decline. Here's how it works.
Not to go in there. And listen, I'm all about having friends around the world and allies when it makes sense. But we should never, whether it's Israel, Great Britain, Germany, France, anyone, no country on the planet, should we say, okay, you're threatened by somebody else. You may have a conflict somewhere else, so we're going to let you use our armed forces to fight your battle, and we'll kill the other side for you. No, because that comes at a cost to us. See, these warlusters don't seem to care about the Americans that could lose their lives if this policy is put into operation. They only think, like Lindsey Graham, they only think about how many Iranians they can kill. Of course, they're not concerned about that, unlike Doug Macgregor, who actually cares about the people, anyone who would be afflicted by war, and that's why he would only use it in a last resort. But in a last resort, he would not hesitate to bring the crushing hammer down if that's what it was necessary. That's what distinguishes him. These people like Lindsey Graham don't. They don't think anything at all about that. They could care less about the impact on the other side, and they're oblivious to the counter response that would come in return, which has been one of the biggest sins of our foreign policy for decades. We take actions and we don't think there's going to be counteractions in response, and there almost always are. Sometimes they're small, like they have been in all those cases I just mentioned, but you are treading on thin ice if you think they will always be that way and that you can confidently go and take action here and that it'll be minor in response. Because one day it's going to be more than you can imagine. And even if it is small and only some Americans get killed, I'm not willing to risk one American life in the pursuit of fighting somebody else's war, even if it's a good friend like our country has been with Israel or Great Britain or any other friend. I would not sacrifice one American to fight their war. If they want to fight a war, that's their issue. That's their constitution. That's their government. That's their pros and cons and their calculations, however they want to do it. Not ours. We should never be in that boat right there. But too many times that we have been. And then in this last section here, Doug really kind of drives it home and shows why it is so important to Americans that we get this right and what the possibilities are if we get it right.
Washington can choose diplomacy over war in its pursuit of a solution. There are many approaches that have yet to be considered. As Lincoln reminded us, ours is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let us be the American generation that broke the chain of endless, pointless war, that faced the fierce urgency of peace with the same resolve with which we face the necessity of war. Let us choose the courage of peace over the delusion of unnecessary conflict. Let us choose the wisdom of restraint over the recklessness of pride. Wars occur when vanity and self-delusion lead to the wrong choice. And if we make the right choice, generations of Americans yet to be born will look back and say, here stood Americans who remembered their oath, who honored their Constitution, who chose the Republic over the Empire, and who in doing so saved the last best hope on earth.
We, the people, matter. You have all these vested interests at high places in our government, have for decades, that have made it their personal ambition to support this war on Iran. There's been people lusting after this forever. They have something they think to gain from this. And listen, let's just strip away this pretense that, oh, they really care about Israel. And they say, oh, all this stuff that Iran says, death to Israel, death to America. Yes, of course, they do say that. It's a well-known fact, but they don't have the capacity to act on it. Israel does have the capacity to act on it in the other direction. Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Everyone also knows that Israel has a far better ability to reach out and strike than Iran does. Ergo, they have been, since 1979, constrained and deterred from attacking Israel. So, rhetoric aside, as I say all the time, words matter, but actions matter more. And when they're not in congruity, you go with what the actions are. The actions scream that Iran is deterred. They want to have regime survival. They want to continue to exist. They're not this rabid animal that the likes of Tom Cotton said on a show we did the other day, that they're this religious zealous and extremist, that they would take action if they had a bomb and all this kind of stuff. They have weapons and they haven't used them so now. So even if they get one, and by the way, they haven't, so there is no weapons program to get rid of so far. And the only reason that's even getting closer is because we got out of the previous negotiated settlement that we had that was severely constraining the Iranian side. So if we didn't want war, we would have just kept that on board and to continue to try and get it renegotiated when it would have expired this year. But instead, we got out of it, got rid of all our leverage, and then gave them every reason to continue accelerating their program, which
if your neck looks like this, you need to watch this video. When you sit at your desk or use your phone, your head protrudes forward. And for every
they did. But they haven't crossed that threshold, even according to Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard a month or so ago. So that's where we are right now. I love some of the stuff he said, though, that we can also, though, as the people, we can choose the positive things. And I love that analogy. He said we should have the same fierce energy for peace that some do, like the Lindsey Grahams and the Tom Cotton, for war. And some are. That's why we're doing this show. That's why we do these things, because we have this fierce energy to prevent unnecessary war, to protect and preserve our people. Doug Macgregor values the lives of every American that signs up and serves in uniform. He does not want one life thrown away unnecessarily. Even though every one of us understand that we may be called to sacrifice our life if we're attacked and we have to defend our country. We were all willing to do that. But we need to get away from this point to where we are so laissez-faire and casual about the life that we are willing to throw some into this garbage heap to be used in wars that don't have anything to do with our national security, like this one here. He said also this delusion of unnecessary conflict. And man, all the ones we've done here, you can go all the way back to the Somalia situation. We got a lot of people killed there, and the place is about the same today as it was at that time. All that we've done is lose a bunch of Americans, and in the meantime, we've stationed more troops there. We went back after Clinton initially left. All we've done is lose more people, and God only knows how much money we've spent there. And the place is the same as it was before we got there, because you can't impose something from the outside that they're not willing to do on the inside. Libya, obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, all these things that we've been attacking and doing over the year have all led to disaster for us and hasn't been produced anything of any positive. So we need to defend ourselves, and we need to have a good, strong military. And as Doug also says, we need to have the wisdom not to use it unnecessarily, because that's how we can create national power. We can keep ourselves safe. We can deter anybody from taking any action against us. That doesn't mean we can stop everybody from doing something to somebody else in the region if that's what they want to do. And I'm talking any region of the world. We're not the policemen of the world. No one ever asked us if we wanted that job. No one ever authorized us to do that job. And millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans, don't want that job for our country, because it costs us staggering amounts of money, produces nothing of value for us. To the contrary, it costs us a great deal. So let's listen to we the people. Let's listen to what Doug says there, and God help us if we violate these tenets and with this wisdom, and instead we seek after the delusion of unnecessary conflict. If we ever cross that Rubicon and go to war with Iran, we're going to be in a world of hurt. It's just going to be, we're rolling the dice to hope that we don't have a worse outcome than we had with the 2003 Iraq War, which was a profound cost all on its own. And I certainly hope we don't do that. We've been covering it throughout. Trump is still making some kind of bellicose comments that could go towards conflict, or maybe can just stay in the economic and diplomatic realm. He's asking for terms that I don't think that Iran can give. So the big question is going to be, then what? If they don't agree to dismantle their program completely and get rid of all reprocessing capabilities and get rid of their long-range nuclear weapon or long-range missile capability, which is what many are saying that we're demanding. If we don't get those, then what's he going to do? Because it seems pretty unlikely that that is going to happen, that the Iranian side won't give in to those things. So we don't know where that's going to go, but we do know that there is a blueprint. Doug Macgregor's talking about it, and that's one of the reasons I wish he was in power right now. If he was the Secretary of Defense, we'd be in a lot better shape. But then again, he wouldn't be the president even in that case there. So we have to hope the president of the United States takes these lessons to heart and does what's in the benefit of our country. He can benefit from it. We would all benefit from it. We would all be safe, secure, and have a chance for enduring prosperity. That's what I want to see us have. And if we listen to what Macgregor said, that's exactly what we're going to get. Thank you very much for watching today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't.
Okay, so I entirely agree with that. We have to avoid conflicts that are not necessary, and we have to collaborate with other nations peacefully, so those conflicts are not going to develop. We need only a fraction of what we're spending now on our defense establishment to be safe and secure. We do not have to be the policemen of the world. We do not have to fight the battles of other nations and other peoples. We do not have to feed their territorial yearnings, and ambitions. We should never do that. We should take the idea of defense very, very seriously. Defense isn't offense. defense is not aggression. Defense and security also have the implication of comprehensive defense. National security is not only a matter of the military aspect of things, it also has to do with seeing to it that your own population is provided for, that your own population can fulfill its aspirations, that your own population is educated. In the United States, we used to understand that. That's what Larry Johnson's article on literacy rates was about. When we used to bring over the immigrants in the period from 1890 to 1920, we educated them. My parents never went to college, but they were highly literate. They graduated from high school at 16. They read books, voraciously. They read newspapers also voraciously. They understood foreign policy issues. They could smell false politicians a mile away. When my grandmother came over here in, it was in 1915 that she came over to the United States. She learned how to read and write English. She became a citizen. She was proud of that. Sometimes she and my parents, when they didn't want us to hear certain things, they would speak in Yiddish. But mostly they spoke English every day. And they never taught us Yiddish because they wanted us to speak only American English. And they put a great emphasis on education. They put a great emphasis on schooling. And they put a great emphasis on defending the United States, and on patriotism. They never thought of the United States as an aggressor. It was a long evolution of the United States to become an aggressor in most of the world. Of course, we always were aggressive in expanding from the East Coast, to the West Coast. And there was all kinds of racism here, and still is, of course. But when it came to expanding to other parts of the world, there was a brief effort of imperialism, also around the period of 1890 to 1920. And then there were lesser efforts okay, at various times. But the post-war empire was unprecedented in the history of the United States. And it has hollowed out our country. And the efforts at defending ourselves and the money we spent on defense and not on building up the internal prosperity of our country for all our people. Obviously, in the last 50 to 60 years, these so-called defense efforts were not real defense. They've hollowed out our country. Reindustrialization is a great idea. It's something we ought to pursue. Not so we can attack China, but so we can provide for ourselves and create prosperity for all of our people and opportunity for all of our people. That when we approach the task of reindustrialization, we have to understand that it will be a long-term effort. Perhaps it will be decades. In my own thinking, reindustrialization actually never ends. Redevelopment never ends. For a great society, we should always be developing, always be advancing. We are not doing that now. I think we have to come home, and I think we have to do that here. Now, for tonight, one last piece to look at. That piece is relatively short, and it's from Colonel Macgregor himself. It's actually part of an interview that Glenn Deason, okay, a professor at, I think it's the University of Southeastern Norway, okay, and the author of a very good book on developments, okay, in international relations. Glenn had a recent interview with Doug Macgregor, and this is a part, okay, of that interview. So let me play it for you now and comment on it.
Trump's war now, or we're not quite there yet?
Well, I think it's Trump's war simply because he was foolish enough to be drawn into it. If you listen to Trump during the election and in the immediate aftermath of the election, he was saying all the right kinds of things. But very shortly thereafter, he was besieged by people who convinced him that, I think, of several things. First of all, you can't do anything, President Trump, unless it looks like a win for you. In other words, if you're going to go sign an agreement, it has to be a win for you. Everything has to be a win. Everything is seen as a contest in the private sector sense. You know, this is a real estate salesman. So he sees everything as I've got to win. I can't lose. I had urged him to just end all aid to this heinous regime in Kiev and withdraw all U.S. military personnel and civilians from Ukraine. Period. Get out. End it. Tell the Europeans we're out. we'll be happy to host a peace conference where you and the Russians can sit down and work out future borders, but we're not going to stay. He's now done a 180-degree turn, and he's going in the opposite direction. I think it's a serious mistake because I don't think Zelensky will last. And as soon as Zelensky is out of business, that'll be the end of this agreement.
Well, I was also noticed that with the 9th of May celebration, there's another ceasefire now. We just had a ceasefire in which the Russians announced unilaterally ceasefire over Easter. And of course, now we have on 9th of May. So some would see this as being, well, a very holy or sacred day for Russia. That is, being now a very Christian country, but also, of course,
Sure.
the importance of 9th of May in their historical memory. Or do you see this as being a test run for proving that there is a possibility to end this war? That not a taste, but testing out the waters, whether or not the opponents, that is the Europeans, Ukrainians, and Americans, are actually interested in pursuing further peace.
I think President Putin has made it very clear that this war is going to end on the terms that Russian military power impose. That's his view. He said it will be dictated by the logic of the battlefield for all intents and purposes, and I think he's right. We certainly can't bring anything to this any longer. Before Trump, we were a co-belligerent, actively doing everything in our power to harm Russia. The hope was that President Trump would end that and normalize relations with Russia. And indeed, there were meetings that indicated that might happen. That's been lost now. And as a result, President Putin spoke to the business community in Russia a few weeks ago and said, forget the sanctions, forget the problems with the West. This is not going to change. So we are going to look elsewhere. And that brings in, the SEC and the BRICS and so forth. In other words, there are other people we're going to do business with because the West is just not a reliable partner. Now, that doesn't mean that will never change. I think he's a smart man, and he knows that Europe is in great turmoil. How much longer can these confused Germans wander around in darkness in Berlin? I mean, the government there with this man Merz, who could not become chancellor, and I think that's a blessing, they are engaged in national suicide. That will end. And the only people that are opposed to national suicide in Germany are the AfD. And I think that's the right position, by the way, for them to take. But the left has done everything in its power. The Soros.
The AfD, of course, is considered to be a right-wing party. But it's true that they are the only party inside of Germany that is not committed to national suicide. I think Doug is right about that.
Dominated elites running the show in Western Europe. They're all trying desperately to portray the AfD as a national German party, as a throwback to National Socialism. I don't think that'll work much longer. With every passing day, AfD becomes more powerful because the average German sees that his country is being destroyed. Eventually, it will be stopped. I think you will eventually see tremendous change in France. I think it will come to England, and then it will spread elsewhere. We've already seen, changes come about in many countries. You've got Fico in Slovakia, you've got Orban in Hungary. These people were always very sober-minded very early on. I think that's going to spread. I think you're going to see change in the right direction in Poland. People there are looking at the West and, as I call the globalist elites, funded, educated, socialized, and created by Soros as the real threat to civilization on the European continent. So, but unfortunately, I don't see us playing a major role. I think we've marginalized ourselves.
It is interesting to see, as now we're remembering the defeat of fascism, how it's actually remembered in the historical narratives, because the German government now, they labeled AfD an extremist organization, which enables or allows its intelligence agencies to effectively, well, to some extent, go after AfD, which is now the largest political opposition. Now, the argument there is that AfD is far right, which means that they can be seen as fascists. Then you can just cancel the opposition if necessary. And of course, AfD looks at the German government now and argues, no, this is fascism. This way of trying to eliminate the opposition. So it is interesting how they see it through their own prism. But no, this cancelling of the opposition, this is quite extreme, especially if you see it in the context of what's happening in France and other places. But
well, again, you're a professor and you teach these things at the university. The word fascism is derived from Latin, and it's has its roots in Rome. The bundle of sticks that bound together represented unity and strength to the Roman Senate and people, with the axe in the center. We have that symbol in the United States Senate. This ancient Roman symbol, which was a fascist symbol. Fascism is about unity. That's it. And you have to ask yourself, who are the people that are afraid of national unity in Germany, in France, in Britain, in all these countries? Well, these are so-called globalists. Well, what is their inspiration? And it's very, very hard to say anything other than Marxism and communism, because communism sought to destroy national identity, destroy borders, and sort of transform people into an amorphous mass of workers.
Okay, I don't know if I agree with that particular interpretation, that it's all about that globalism is about socialism and Marxism. From my point of view, the globalist movement was a neoliberal movement, and it was very much opposed to socialism and to Marxism, of course, and to communism. So I think Doug is off base there, and that his understanding is not as deep as it is in some other areas. He does represent the idea, though, of national unity as opposed to internationalism. And while that idea can be very destructive, it can also be constructive when you have a problem inside of your country of disunity and of exploitation, of most people by a small number of extremely well-off people. When you have an oligarchy, such as you have now, in the United States, we have to recognize, however, that fascism has been the representative, of oligarchy in a variety of nations, including, in Italy, and including in Nazi Germany as well.
And consumers. That's about it. And I think the Germans, certainly since they lost the war, have allowed themselves to be transformed into this quiet, almost politically neutral public that marched in whatever direction the Allies and government said, because they were apologizing for whatever they did during the Second World War. I think the apology tour is over, and it should be over. I think eventually Germany will straighten out. It may not happen immediately, but it will. So what you're describing in Germany, which is reminiscent of East Germany, the Stasi, snooping and surveilling people and then threatening them, I think that will fail. And I think the alternative will be a nationalist movement that will take over and say, it's Germany first now. We have to think about ourselves, our national industry, our scientific industrial development, our economy. All of that will happen. It's a matter of waiting for it. And I think if anything, Mr. Putin is very patient and he understands the true direction that things are moving. One benefit of having been a communist at some point in your life is that you learned about this thing we call the correlation of forces. Well, the correlation of forces is very much in favor of Russia. And the correlation of forces right now favors China. It favors many countries. It does not favor us. And it does not favor Europe in its current state of mind.
So that's it. I thought that was a very interesting discussion and very important in terms of emphasizing the role of unity in nations. And we need to have that concern here, not in such a way that we move towards fascism, but we need a democratic kind of unity. We need a bottom-up kind of unity. The kind of unity we achieved during the period of the 1930s and the 1940s. We need to go back to that. We need to go back to industrial policy, and to reindustrialization, as well. Dee, do you have any comments?
I think you pretty much covered it.
Oh, so you have no disagreements?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we're getting to the place now where we can close. We haven't gotten too many comments, actually, since about 10:38. It looks like we had about the same attendance as we had in the early part of the stream.
Oh, so that's good.
That's good, but there was a part where the comments got broken. The comments from Facebook, which had been coming in pretty well, kind of stopped.
Who knows what happened?
Who knows what happened, yes.
Especially Facebook these days.
Yes, especially Facebook these days. Okay, well, thank you for coming, Dee.
Thank you for having me.
It was great for you to be here tonight. And
Yes.
I guess we'll see each other very soon again.
Yes, and also, you have the your Patreon account, Joe_Firestone.
Ah, yes.
And to buy me a coffee, Joe Firestone. I know things are difficult for a lot of people, but if anybody's got anything to spare, if you could help out Joe right now, him and Bonnie.
Okay, well, thank you, Dee. And I hope that people can help you out, as well. Will you please give them your financial coordinates?
Well, mainly I have a Venmo, a Cash App, and PayPal, and it's all Dolores Pierce. So, well, anyway, we'll see how things are going and when I'll have a show again. But definitely we know Joe's having his show on Tuesday.
Yes. As of now, I'm due to be here on Tuesday, and I hope that you'll be with me, Dee, for that show.
Yes, I'll be here Tuesday. And I'm not sure if I'm going to have a show in between, but I may. How things going in the world just kind of prompts a show. And hopefully I'll be back on Facebook, but we'll see.
Yes, we'll see. If you're not back on Facebook, then I think you should find another outlet to stream to.
Mm.
There are many other outlets. Facebook is not the only one.
That's true. I mean, X actually has more of an audience. I've noticed that. And it does stream to other places, but I'm really not so familiar and into it, even though it does go to other places. But it helps look into more things.
Yes.
I mean, I do share my YouTube over to Blue Sky like I do with yours over to Blue Sky usually. So
Yes. Okay. So
okay,
I guess that ends it for tonight. But thank you all for coming. And again, thank you, Dee, for coming.
yes, thank you, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay.
Yes,
Have a wonderful weekend.
you too.